Most people think the fat around their belly is just extra weight, something cosmetic, something that happens when you get older. But I want to tell you something important right from the start. The most dangerous fat in your body is not the kind you can pinch with your fingers. It is the fat you cannot see. That deep fat wrapped around your liver, your heart, your pancreas, even your intestines is called visceral fat. And it is not passive. It is not harmless. It behaves like a toxic endocrine organ. It releases inflammatory signals into your bloodstream every single day, quietly damaging your metabolism, your blood vessels, and your brain. When visceral fat builds up, it pushes your body toward insulin resistance, fatty liver disease, heart disease, and accelerated aging. Many people blame a growing waistline on eating too much or slowing metabolism, but the real drivers are hormones, especially insulin and cortisol. These hormones decide whether your body stores fat or burns it. And when they are out of balance, visceral fat grows, even if you are not eating that much. Here is the hard truth. If you have fat surrounding your liver, your heart, or your pancreas, that is not just fat. It is a biological signal that your body is aging faster than it should, faster than your calendar age, faster than you realize. The good news is this. Your body actually wants to get rid of visceral fat. It is designed to burn it efficiently when the right biological switches are turned on, and that is what this video is about. This is not a crash diet. It is not extreme calorie restriction. It does not require expensive supplements or medications. It is about working with your biology instead of fighting it. In this video, I am going to walk you through 7 science-backed steps that help lower insulin, calm cortisol, and shift your body into a fat-burning state that targets visceral fat specifically. These are practical steps rooted in human physiology, not trends or shortcuts. If you suspect you might have visceral fat, or if your energy has dropped, your waistline has changed, or your blood markers are creeping in the wrong direction, I encourage you to stay with me until the end. One of the final steps may completely change how your body feels and functions. To understand why visceral fat is so dangerous, we first need to be very clear about what it actually is. Not all body fat is the same. The fat you see under your skin, on your arms, hips, or thighs is called subcutaneous fat. While excess amounts are not ideal, that fat is relatively inert. It mainly serves as energy storage and insulation. Visceral fat is very different. It forms deep inside your abdomen, wrapping itself around your vital organs, your liver, your pancreas, your kidneys, and even your heart. You cannot pinch it. You cannot always see it in the mirror. But it is there, and it is active. This is why visceral fat has earned the name silent killer. It does its damage quietly, without pain, without warning, and often without obvious symptoms, until serious disease appears. What makes visceral fat especially dangerous is that it does not just sit there. It behaves like a biological factory. It releases inflammatory molecules called cytokines directly into your bloodstream. These cytokines create chronic low-grade inflammation throughout your body, the kind of inflammation that slowly damages blood vessels, disrupts insulin signaling, and accelerates disease. This inflammatory state is a major driver of type 2 diabetes. When cytokines interfere with insulin signaling, your cells become resistant to insulin. Glucose stays in the blood longer. The pancreas works harder, more insulin is released, and that excess insulin pushes even more fat into the visceral compartment, creating a vicious cycle. The heart is not spared. Visceral fat increases triglycerides, lowers protective HDL cholesterol, and promotes plaque formation in arteries. Over time, this raises the risk of heart attacks and strokes. The liver is another major target. Fructose and excess glucose are converted into fat inside liver cells, leading to fatty liver disease, which further worsens insulin resistance and inflammation. There is also a strong link between visceral fat and cancer. Chronic inflammation creates an environment where abnormal cells are more likely to grow and divide unchecked. Cytokines promote angiogenesis, the growth of new blood vessels, which tumors depend on for survival. This is why higher levels of visceral fat are associated with increased risk of cancers such as colorectal, breast, and pancreatic cancer. Now, here is something most people do not realize. Visceral fat does not just increase disease risk, it actually accelerates biological aging. People with high visceral fat often show signs of aging faster than their chronological age. Their blood markers look older, their energy declines sooner, their recovery slows, their immune system weakens. This is not about appearance, it is about how fast your internal systems are wearing down. One of the reasons visceral fat is so powerful is that it functions like an endocrine organ. That means it actively produces hormones and signaling molecules that influence your entire body. It communicates directly with your brain, your liver, and your muscles. And unfortunately, most of the signals it sends are harmful. When visceral fat expands, it increases cortisol sensitivity in fat cells, especially in the abdominal region. This makes stress more likely to drive further fat accumulation right in the same area. It also alters appetite regulation, increasing cravings for sugar and refined carbohydrates, further feeding the cycle. The paradox is this: visceral fat is extremely harmful, but it is also highly metabolically active. That means it responds quickly when the right signals are applied. Unlike subcutaneous fat, visceral fat is designed to be mobilized rapidly in times of need. From an evolutionary perspective, it exists to provide quick energy during stress or scarcity. That is why, when insulin levels drop, inflammation decreases, and hormonal balance is restored, visceral fat is often the first fat your body's willing to burn. This is where hope comes in. You are not stuck with it. Your body has the machinery to eliminate it efficiently if you create the right conditions. Understanding that visceral fat is not just fat, but a driver of inflammation, disease, and accelerated aging changes how we approach health. It shifts the goal away from weight loss alone and toward metabolic health. And once you see visceral fat for what it truly is, you begin to understand why targeting hormones and daily habits is far more powerful than simply eating less. If there is one hormone that determines whether your body stores fat or burns it, that hormone is insulin, not cortisol, not thyroid hormone, not testosterone. Insulin is the master switch. Insulin's primary job is to move glucose out of your bloodstream and into your cells. That is essential for survival. But insulin has another role that is just as powerful. It tells your body to store energy. And when insulin stays elevated for long periods of time, fat storage becomes the default state. Here is the key principle you need to understand. Your body cannot burn fat and store fat at the same time. These two states are mutually exclusive. When insulin is high, fat burning is turned off. Biochemically, insulin suppresses an enzyme called hormone-sensitive lipase, which is responsible for releasing stored fat from fat cells. When insulin is low, fat burning is turned on. There is no middle ground. This is basic endocrinology. It has been understood for decades. This has been demonstrated in metabolic research published in journals such as the Journal of Clinical Investigation and Diabetes. And yet it is often overlooked when people struggle with stubborn belly fat, especially visceral fat. Visceral fat is uniquely sensitive to insulin. One reason is that visceral fat cells express a higher density of insulin receptors compared to subcutaneous fat. That is one of the reasons it accumulates so quickly when insulin levels remain elevated. When insulin signals are frequent and strong, these cells respond rapidly by pulling in triglycerides and expanding. This is why people can gain visceral fat even without dramatic weight gain. The scale may not change much, but insulin directs fat inward around the organs where it causes the most harm. Now, let us talk about cortisol, the stress hormone. Cortisol is often blamed for belly fat, and there is some truth to that. But cortisol does not act alone. Cortisol is an amplifier. It works in partnership with insulin. When cortisol rises due to chronic stress or poor sleep, it increases blood sugar by signaling the liver to release glucose. That glucose then triggers insulin release. The insulin is what actually drives fat storage. Cortisol simply sets the stage. Think of cortisol as turning up the volume while insulin controls the switch. Without insulin, Cortisol cannot store fat. With insulin present, cortisol makes the effect stronger, especially in the abdominal region where fat cells are more sensitive to stress signals. This explains why stress eating is so powerful. Stress raises cortisol. Stress also drives cravings for sugar and refined carbohydrates. Those foods spike insulin. Together, cortisol and insulin push fat straight into the visceral compartment. Another important concept is metabolic mode. Your body operates in one of two dominant modes at any given time: fat storing mode or fat burning mode. In fat storing mode, insulin is elevated, glucose is the primary fuel, excess energy is converted into fat, inflammation tends to rise, hunger returns quickly after meals, energy fluctuates. In fat burning mode, insulin is low. Fat and ketones become the primary fuel. Stored fat is mobilized for energy. Hunger stabilizes. Energy becomes more steady. Inflammation decreases. You cannot be in both modes simultaneously. You cannot nibble all day, spike insulin repeatedly, and expect your body to burn visceral fat. The hormonal signals simply do not allow it. Here is where visceral fat gives us an advantage. Even though it is dangerous, it is also metabolically active. When insulin drops, visceral fat responds quickly. It releases fatty acids into the bloodstream to be used as fuel. This is why changes in insulin can lead to noticeable reductions in waist circumference before the scale changes. Lowering insulin does not require starvation. It requires understanding which foods and habits trigger insulin most strongly and which allow insulin to fall naturally. Carbohydrates, especially sugars and starches, produce the largest insulin response. Protein produces a moderate response that supports muscle maintenance and repair. Dietary fat produces very little insulin response at all. When insulin levels fall, other hormones take over. Glucagon rises, signaling fat release. Growth hormone increases, preserving muscle while mobilizing fat. Adrenaline helps liberate fatty acids for energy. This hormonal environment is exactly what your body needs to target visceral fat. This is why focusing on insulin is so powerful. It addresses the root cause rather than the symptom. Instead of fighting fat with willpower, you change the hormonal signals that determine where energy goes. Once you understand that insulin is the master switch, everything else begins to make sense. Why certain foods stall fat loss, why stress makes belly fat worse, why fasting works, why visceral fat is often the first fat to leave when conditions are right. In the next part, we are going to look closely at the foods that quietly keep insulin elevated, even when people believe they are eating healthy. And once you see them clearly, you will understand why visceral fat can persist despite good intentions. One of the biggest obstacles to losing visceral fat is not junk food. It is food that people genuinely believe is healthy. These are foods recommended for decades, foods associated with heart health, energy, and longevity. Yet they quietly keep insulin elevated and drive fat deep into the abdomen. Let us start with oatmeal. Oatmeal is often described as a heart-healthy breakfast. It contains fiber, beta-glucans, and it feels warm and comforting. But when you look at how oatmeal behaves in the body, the story changes. A typical bowl of oatmeal, even without added sugar, breaks down into glucose very quickly. 2 servings can deliver the equivalent of over 50 grams of glucose into the bloodstream. That creates a strong insulin response early in the day, locking your body into fat storing mode before breakfast is even finished. Then there are acai bowls. They are marketed as antioxidant powerhouses, bright colors, exotic fruits, superfood branding. But many acai bowls contain the equivalent of 20 teaspoons of sugar, often more than a dessert. Most of that sugar comes from fruit purees, honey, and added sweeteners. The result is a massive insulin spike that overwhelms the system and pushes excess energy straight into visceral fat storage. Orange juice is another classic example. For years, people have been told that orange juice is a healthy way to start the morning. It contains vitamin C. It tastes fresh. But 2 cups of orange juice contain more than 50 grams of sugar, most of it fructose. When you drink juice, you remove the fiber that slows absorption. That sugar floods the bloodstream rapidly, forcing the pancreas to release insulin and the liver to convert fructose into fat. Smoothies fall into the same category. Blending fruit does not make it harmless. In fact, it often makes things worse. Bananas, berries, yogurt, honey, and juice blended together create a liquid sugar delivery system. Liquids are absorbed faster than solid foods. Insulin rises quickly, and because smoothies do not require chewing, satiety signals are weaker, leading people to consume far more sugar than they realize. Whole grains are another area of confusion. Whole wheat bread, brown rice, quinoa, and whole grain cereals are often recommended as healthier alternatives. But from an insulin perspective, many of these foods behave similarly to refined carbohydrates. They are dense sources of starch that rapidly convert to glucose. Whole grain bread still raises blood sugar. Brown rice still spikes insulin. Quinoa, despite its reputation, is still a high carbohydrate seed. Fruit deserves special attention. Fruit is natural. Fruit contains vitamins and antioxidants, but fruit also contains fructose, and fructose follows a unique metabolic pathway. Unlike glucose, fructose is processed almost entirely by the liver. When fructose enters the liver in excess, it is rapidly converted into fat. That fat accumulates inside liver cells, contributing to fatty liver disease and increasing visceral fat. This is why fructose is particularly problematic for metabolic health. It bypasses many of the regulatory steps that control glucose metabolism. It does not trigger insulin directly, but it creates insulin resistance over time by overloading the liver. A fatty liver releases more glucose into the bloodstream, which then drives insulin higher throughout the day. This is the mechanism behind why people who eat large amounts of fruit juice, or sweetened smoothies can still develop visceral fat and insulin resistance, even if they avoid processed junk food. The problem is not that these foods are toxic in isolation. The problem is frequency, quantity, and context. In a modern environment where food is always available and activity levels are low, these carbohydrates keep insulin elevated for most of the day. The body never enters a true fat-burning state. This is why healthy carbs fail when the goal is visceral fat loss. They are still carbohydrates, they still raise insulin, and insulin still tells the body to store fat. People often say, "I eat clean, but my belly will not go away." This is usually the reason. The diet looks healthy on the surface, but hormonally, it keeps fat locked in place. Once you see these foods through a hormonal lens rather than a marketing lens, everything becomes clearer. It is not about good foods versus bad foods. It is about whether a food allows insulin to fall or forces it to rise. When insulin remains elevated, visceral fat stays protected. When insulin drops, visceral fat becomes accessible. And the foods you choose each day determine which signal dominates. In the next section, we are going to talk about what to eat instead. Foods that nourish your body, stabilize insulin, and create the conditions for visceral fat to finally be released. Once you remove the foods that keep insulin elevated, the next question is simple and important. What do you eat instead? The answer is not about deprivation. It is about nourishment. This approach is not designed to make you hungry. It is designed to stabilize hormones so your body can finally do what it is meant to do. The foundation begins with protein. Protein is essential for maintaining muscle, supporting metabolism, and controlling appetite. As we age, protein becomes even more important because muscle mass naturally declines, and muscle is one of the most powerful drivers of metabolic health. Protein provides amino acids that repair tissue, support immune function, and keep blood sugar stable. Whole eggs are an excellent example. The yolk contains choline, which supports liver function and helps prevent fat accumulation in the liver. Eggs also provide high-quality protein that keeps you full for hours. Fish such as wild-caught salmon offer protein along with omega-3 fats that reduce inflammation and improve insulin sensitivity. Poultry like chicken and turkey provide lean protein without excessive insulin stimulation. Red meat, when consumed in reasonable portions, supplies iron, zinc, and B vitamins that support energy production and fat oxidation. Protein does create a modest insulin response, but that response is necessary and beneficial. It supports muscle repair without driving fat storage. When protein intake is adequate, cravings decrease, and it becomes much easier to avoid snacking. Alongside protein, healthy fats play a critical role. Dietary fat does not significantly raise insulin. Instead, it provides steady energy and helps activate fat-burning pathways. Fats also slow digestion, which helps keep blood sugar stable after meals. Olive oil is a cornerstone. It contains monounsaturated fats and polyphenols that support cardiovascular health and reduce inflammation. Avocados provide healthy fats along with fiber and potassium. Nuts such as macadamia nuts are low in carbohydrates and high in beneficial fats when eaten in moderation. Coconut oil and butter from grass-fed sources provide fats that can be used directly for energy. These fats do not clog your arteries when consumed as part of a low insulin eating pattern. In fact, when insulin is low, fats are more likely to be burned rather than stored. The metabolic context matters far more than the fat itself. Vegetables are the third pillar. Not all vegetables are equal when the goal is visceral fat reduction. Starchy vegetables behave more like carbohydrates. Non-starchy vegetables provide nutrients without spiking insulin. Leafy greens such as spinach, arugula, and kale are rich in antioxidants and support liver detoxification. Cruciferous vegetables like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and cabbage contain compounds that enhance the liver's ability to process and eliminate fat-soluble toxins. This becomes especially important as visceral fat breaks down and releases stored inflammatory substances. Cauliflower, rice, zucchini, and cabbage can replace traditional starches while still providing texture and satisfaction. These vegetables provide volume, fiber, and micronutrients without disrupting hormonal balance. The goal of this way of eating is hormonal stability. When insulin remains low and steady, your body can access stored fat between meals. Hunger becomes calmer. Energy becomes more consistent. Meals feel satisfying rather than restrictive. This is not about counting calories. It is about choosing foods that allow insulin to fall naturally after eating. When that happens, fat-burning hormones rise and visceral fat becomes available as fuel. Many people are surprised to discover they eat less overall without trying. Protein and fat are inherently more satiating. Blood sugar does not crash. Cravings diminish. The constant mental noise around food begins to quiet. This way of eating supports your metabolism rather than fighting it. It nourishes your body while creating the conditions for visceral fat to finally be released. And when eating supports hormonal balance, fat loss becomes a biological response rather than a battle of willpower. In the next part, we will address another habit that quietly blocks visceral fat loss, even when food choices are improved. It is something almost everyone does, often without realizing the metabolic cost. One of the most overlooked barriers to burning visceral fat is constant eating. Snacking feels harmless. A handful of nuts, a piece of fruit, a protein bar, a sip of something with calories. But metabolically, every time you eat, your body has to respond. And that response almost always involves insulin. Insulin does not care whether you call it a snack or a meal. From a hormonal perspective, food is food. Each time calories enter your system, insulin rises to manage that incoming energy. When this happens repeatedly throughout the day, insulin never has a chance to fall. And when insulin stays elevated, fat burning stays shut off. This is why snacking blocks fat loss even when food choices are otherwise good. You may be eating high-quality foods, but if insulin is constantly being stimulated, your body remains stuck in fat storing mode. I often compare this to mental focus. Imagine you are deeply concentrated on an important task. Your brain is working efficiently. Then every 20 or 30 minutes, someone interrupts you. The interruption might be small, but each one breaks your focus. You never reach a productive flow state. That is exactly what snacking does to your metabolism. Fat burning requires time. It requires insulin to fall low enough for other hormones to take over. Glucagon, growth hormone, and adrenaline need a clear window to signal fat release. Constant eating interrupts that process over and over again. This leads us to an important concept called metabolic flexibility. Metabolic flexibility is your body's ability to switch smoothly between fuel sources. In a flexible metabolism, your body can burn glucose after meals and then transition to burning fat between meals. This is how humans evolved to function. Frequent snacking destroys metabolic flexibility. The body becomes dependent on constant glucose intake. Hunger signals become distorted. Energy dips appear between snacks. Cravings increase, and fat stores become locked away. When you stop snacking and create clear boundaries between meals, something powerful happens. Insulin rises during the meal, as it should, then it falls. During that drop, your body begins to access stored fat for energy. This is when visceral fat starts to loosen its grip. Most people are surprised by how quickly hunger recalibrates. At first, the idea of not snacking can feel uncomfortable, but within a few days, appetite hormones begin to normalize. Meals become more satisfying. Energy becomes steadier. The urge to graze fades. Meal timing matters more than most people realize. Eating 3 structured meals per day, or even 2 meals for some people, creates predictable hormonal rhythms. Your body learns when to expect food and when to burn stored energy. This rhythm supports metabolic health far more than eating small amounts all day long. Another benefit of eliminating snacks is improved insulin sensitivity. When insulin receptors get a break between meals, they respond more efficiently when insulin is needed. This means less insulin is required to manage the same amount of food. Lower insulin means less fat storage pressure. This is not about willpower. It is about biology. When you allow insulin to fall between meals, you create the hormonal conditions required for fat burning. Visceral fat, which is highly sensitive to insulin changes, responds quickly. Stopping snacking is one of the simplest changes you can make. It costs nothing. It does not require special foods or supplements, yet it has a profound impact on your metabolism. In the next section, we are going to talk about how movement can amplify this process. Not long workouts, not exhausting routines, but specific types of movement that directly target visceral fat and work in harmony with the hormonal changes you are creating. When it comes to movement, most people think they need long workouts or exhausting routines to lose belly fat, but visceral fat responds best to very specific signals, not volume, not duration, signals. And there are 2 forms of movement that deliver those signals more effectively than almost anything else. The first is sprint training, short bursts of intense effort followed by full recovery. This type of movement taps directly into your hormonal system. When you sprint, your body releases adrenaline and noradrenaline. These hormones rapidly activate lipolysis, the breakdown of stored fat, especially visceral fat. At the same time, sprinting triggers a surge in human growth hormone. Growth hormone plays a critical role in fat metabolism. It helps mobilize fat while protecting muscle. This is particularly important as we age because we want to burn fat without losing lean tissue. Sprinting also depletes muscle glycogen quickly. When glycogen stores drop, your body is forced to switch fuel sources. During recovery, it turns to stored fat to meet energy demands. This effect does not stop when the sprint ends. Your metabolism remains elevated for hours afterward as your body restores balance. The protocol is simple. You sprint at maximum effort for about 20 seconds, then you rest completely for 90 seconds. Full rest matters because it allows the nervous system to reset and supports hormone release. You repeat the cycle 3 times. The entire session can be completed in 5 to 7 minutes. This can be done on a track, a treadmill, a stationary bike, or even brisk uphill walking if sprinting is not appropriate. The key is intensity followed by rest, quality over quantity. Research consistently shows that this type of high-intensity interval training reduces visceral fat more effectively than steady-state cardio. You do not need to do it every day. 2 to 3 sessions per week is enough to send a strong metabolic signal. The second form of movement is far more gentle but equally powerful. Walking after meals. When you eat, even a low carbohydrate meal, blood glucose rises. The higher your level of insulin resistance, the higher that rise tends to be. Traditionally, insulin is required to move glucose into cells, but skeletal muscle has another pathway. When muscles contract, they can pull glucose out of the bloodstream without needing insulin. This is a powerful mechanism. It means movement can lower blood sugar and insulin naturally. A 15 to 20-minute walk after a meal allows your muscles to absorb glucose directly. This blunts the post-meal blood sugar spike and reduces the amount of insulin your pancreas needs to release. Lower insulin means a quicker return to fat-burning mode. Studies have shown that post-meal walking can reduce blood sugar levels by up to 50% compared to remaining sedentary. That is a profound effect from a simple habit. Walking also improves circulation, digestion, and mood. It reduces stress and supports better sleep later in the evening. It is one of the most accessible forms of movement available to almost everyone. Think of your muscles as a glucose sink. The more active they are, the more glucose they can absorb. Muscle tissue is metabolically active. It burns energy even at rest. And when it is stimulated regularly, it protects you from insulin spikes and fat accumulation. This is why movement does not need to be extreme to be effective. It needs to be strategic. Sprinting sends a powerful hormonal signal. Walking after meals manages glucose in real time. Together, they work in harmony with the dietary and timing changes you have already made. This combination allows insulin to stay lower throughout the day, it keeps growth hormone active, it improves metabolic flexibility, and most importantly, it creates the conditions for visceral fat to be used as fuel. In the next section, we are going to bring everything together with fasting, sleep, and stress management. These are the final pieces that allow the body to complete the transition from fat storage to fat burning. At this point, you have already changed what you eat, when you eat, and how you move. Now we come to the final set of signals that tell your body whether it is safe to burn deep visceral fat. These signals come from fasting, sleep, and stress. Let us begin with intermittent fasting, specifically the 18-6 pattern. This means you fast for 18 hours and eat within a 6-hour window. This approach is powerful because it gives insulin enough time to fall to very low levels on a daily basis. When insulin stays low for an extended period, your body has no choice but to turn to stored fat for energy. During the fasting window, several important processes occur. One of them is autophagy, the body's internal recycling system. Damaged proteins, dysfunctional cells, and metabolic waste are broken down and cleared. This improves cellular efficiency and supports long-term metabolic health. At the same time, growth hormone levels rise significantly. Growth hormone helps mobilize fat, especially visceral fat, while preserving muscle mass. This is one of the reasons fasting can improve body composition rather than simply causing weight loss. Your body becomes leaner and more efficient. An 18-6 schedule is practical for most people. You finish dinner early in the evening, sleep through the night, and delay your first meal until late morning or midday. Water, black coffee, and unsweetened tea are fine during the fast. This pattern aligns with natural circadian rhythms and makes use of sleep as part of the fasting period. Now, let us talk about sleep, because sleep is not passive. Sleep is an active metabolic state. Deep sleep, in particular, is when the majority of growth hormone is released. This hormone surge supports fat burning, tissue repair, and immune function. Most adults need about 7 to 8 hours of sleep, but what matters most is quality, specifically the amount of deep sleep you achieve. Deep sleep is when your nervous system shifts fully into repair mode, heart rate slows, blood pressure drops, inflammation decreases, fat metabolism increases. If deep sleep is impaired, cortisol rises. Insulin sensitivity declines, hunger hormones become dysregulated. Even with perfect nutrition, poor sleep can block visceral fat loss. There are simple ways to improve deep sleep. Keeping the bedroom cool supports the natural drop in core body temperature that signals sleep onset. Darkness matters. Even small sources of light can suppress melatonin. Reducing screen exposure before bed helps calm the nervous system. Magnesium can also be helpful. Magnesium glycinate, taken in the evening, supports relaxation and deeper sleep without next day grogginess for many people. Finally, we need to address stress. Cortisol is not inherently bad. It is essential for survival. But when cortisol remains elevated due to chronic stress, it works together with insulin to promote fat storage, particularly in the abdomen. Stress comes in many forms: mental stress, emotional stress, physical stress, chemical stress. From poor air quality or excessive stimulants, your body does not distinguish between them. It responds hormonally. One of the most effective ways to lower cortisol naturally is to increase oxytocin. Oxytocin is the hormone of connection and safety. When oxytocin rises, cortisol falls. Simple human behaviors increase oxytocin. Physical connection with people you trust, hugging a loved one, spending time with a pet, genuine laughter, meaningful conversation. These are not soft suggestions. They are biological interventions. Gratitude is another powerful tool. Regular gratitude practices have been shown to lower cortisol and improve nervous system balance. Writing down a few things you are grateful for each day shifts brain chemistry toward calm and resilience. When stress is managed, sleep improves. When sleep improves, insulin sensitivity improves. When insulin sensitivity improves, visceral fat becomes easier to burn. This is not coincidence. It is an interconnected system. Fasting lowers insulin. Sleep raises growth hormone. Stress control lowers cortisol. Together, they create the internal environment your body needs to release visceral fat safely and sustainably. In the final part, I will bring all of these steps together and show you how they fit into a simple, realistic roadmap that you can begin applying immediately. Let me bring everything together for you in a clear and simple way. Reducing visceral fat is not about punishment. It is not about starving yourself, taking expensive supplements, or following extreme programs that leave you exhausted. It is about biology. When you create the right internal conditions, your body naturally does what it was designed to do. You lower insulin by choosing foods that stabilize blood sugar and by giving your body time between meals. You stop constant snacking so fat-burning hormones can take over. You move with intention, using short bursts of intensity to activate powerful hormones, and gentle walking to help muscles absorb glucose. You allow fasting to deepen that fat-burning state. You protect deep sleep so growth hormone can do its work, and you manage stress so cortisol does not sabotage the process. These are not separate tricks. They are connected signals working together. Each step reinforces the others. When insulin stays low, visceral fat becomes accessible. When sleep improves, fat metabolism accelerates. When stress is reduced, the body stops clinging to fat for protection. What I want you to remember is this: your body is not broken. It has not failed you. Visceral fat builds up because the environment inside the body has changed. And when that environment changes again, the body responds quickly. You do not need to do everything perfectly. Even small steps matter. One meal at a time, one walk after dinner, one earlier bedtime. Progress builds momentum. If you found this video helpful, please share it with someone who feels tired, struggles with belly fat, or worries about their long-term health. And I would love to hear from you. Which step will you start with today? Thank you for taking the time to watch. I wish you strength, clarity, and good health, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.